Kia ora, I'm Nadine Higgins and welcome to your personal finance podcast, The Prosperity Project. On this podcast, I'm on a mission to empower you financially. I am a columnist and a journalist, an investor, a financial advisor, and the mum of a toddler. But I do not claim to be the font of all knowledge. I'm still figuring it out too. And that's why I'll be bringing you the experts and mining their big brains for all the things you and I need to know every week. Today, the cost of saying I do. The average wedding in New Zealand apparently costs about $30,000, and finance companies often feature pictures of beautiful weddings when touting their high interest loans. But debt is no way to start your life of wedded bliss, so how do you avoid financial stress when planning your big day? Joining us is Astrid Braid, wedding planner at PS I Love You Events. Hi Astrid.
Hi.
Do you think that $30,000 figure is, as an average, is still about right?
Look, I think in New Zealand, they've said for a long time now that the average wedding cost is around $35,000 to $40,000. I think that figure is a really client-driven figure for weddings. I don't necessarily think anymore it's a realistic figure. I know that some couples do have that budget and their goal is to spend $35,000 to $40,000. Is that doable? Yes, but would you have to make sure that day is pared back? You have to be really cautious with your guest numbers and keep the overall visual pretty minimalistic. Yes. I mean, obviously from our end being event designers and planners, the minute that you bring us on board, naturally, you're doubling that budget, and fairly so. You're bringing on someone that's got years of experience in the area of creating high-end events, and they're there to elevate your event. But in terms of whether the realistic spend now is $35,000 to $40,000, my instinct would tell me no. I think that the average spend has probably risen closer to that $50,000 to $60,000 spend.
Which is a big chunk of change. There's no two ways about it. I mean, it's relative to how much money you have, but that's a lot when you're starting out as a couple. Do you think that figure creeping up is driven by the aesthetic everyone sees online and wanting to recreate it, or is it just more expensive to put on an event?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of both. I think it's absolutely driven by that whole Pinterest realm. I think people have gone down a real rabbit hole with that. And rightfully so. There's so much imagery out there at the moment that you want to tap into and whatnot. And, even with our clients that come to us, they come with a dream of what they want the wedding to look like. And a lot of the time, even when we're doing these higher end budgets, their budget doesn't necessarily align with the vision that they're seeing from these weddings happening in, Dubai and in the States, where they've got, budget's really an afterthought for them. So when we are looking at these Pinterest-styled weddings, we say to our couples, hey, what is it about this particular image that's really resonating with you? Pick one or two factors within that picture that stand out, and let's look to pull those into your day instead of replicating every single element within that image. So you can get that Pinterest feel, you can get that elevated event, but you don't need to blow the budget in order to get a similar-ish look.
Do you think that people then, from what you're saying, is they start out with the ideal rather than here's the money we've got, and they quickly work out that the two don't necessarily meet?
Absolutely. And I think it's really that's really a fair thing to say. And I think that a lot of brides, couples get really lost in the overall look, and they probably do it slightly back to front. There's certainly a bit of a strategy in that you should start with your budget, then you should create your guest wish list, and then you should decide on the style of the day, and very much in that order. So, with your guest list, that fundamentally dictates your budget. So we always say break your guest list down into 3 realms. So your must-have, you absolutely want there, they're non-negotiable, closest friends and family. Then you'd have your would like to have if the budget permits, and we'll make exceptions to our overall design in order to have those people there. And then I feel really obligated to have these people, but I would happily forego them if the budget gets too tight. So that's kind of what we always suggest with our clients, regardless of their budget, would be to really have a thorough think about your guest list and then kind of work your budget around that, or vice versa, before you actually even pick a venue, even think about the design or style of your day.
I was advised, have a think about who you would buy a really fancy dinner for. And if you wouldn't do that for that person, what are they doing at your wedding day?
Absolutely. And it's a really fine line, because you're dealing with so many emotions, and, there's people that, your mum's great aunt that you feel really obligated to invite, but you haven't seen her in the last 7 years. But, if you look at every guest as a number of $100 to $200 plus to cover the cost of their catering and their beverage and their seat and their stationery and everything that requires going into a day to make it uniquely yours, every guest headcount has a cost.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to get into the ways that we can economise a little bit without sacrificing the dream of what you want the day to be like. But I also just wondered, is it still the done thing that parents pay for weddings? That's not how I did mine. But I just wondered whether parents still see it, especially when people are getting married a wee bit older. Are they still footing the bill?
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, it's not the way that my husband and I did ours either. But in saying that, yes, it still very much happens. It's a really good mix. I think a lot of the weddings that we tend to do are sort of that higher end clientele where, budget can be a bit of an afterthought. With those weddings, parents still are footing the bill. Do they get more of an elevated say in how that wedding plays out when they do have, money invested in this day? It really depends on the family and who the couple are.
If the parents are footing the bill, then maybe the great aunt you haven't seen for 7 years does get invited, because the parents get to decide.
Absolutely is their front row, for sure. Yeah, look, and the other side of it is we do have lots of amazing couples who are really adamant that they just want the day to be all about them. They want exactly what they want. They want the guests they want. They want the visual they want. They don't want to be negotiating any terms with their parents. So they pay for the day. That may, in some cases, mean that they have to be a little bit more cautious with how they're setting it up and designing and what champagne they can serve and whatnot. But they're fine with that in order to get the day they want.
So we talked about the guest list. The more you invite, the more it's going to cost. So I guess that's one place where you can make some savings. What are some of the other areas that cost more than people realise that you could economise on, or maybe not, that economising there would be a mistake?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, as we said, guest count would be the biggest lever for that. Following on from there, food and beverage is obviously a major cost. I suppose you can make really smart choices there, and you can get a little bit clever and creative. For example, canapes post-ceremony are hugely favoured. 5 canapes per person, $25 a head for 100 people, $2,500. That's kind of the go-to, and I guess what people think they need to serve. If you are trying to pull back your costs, I would say, hey, why don't you consider 3 medium-sized, beautiful cheese boards at $250 a board, 3 boards, $750, immediate saving. I guess with food, the other area, and what's becoming really popular is that family shared style meal. You can still tailor that to feel really bespoke and beautiful, but it certainly creates a saving opposed to those individual plated silver service, meals that are delivered to your table. If you really want to do that and you really want those individual meals and that's the vibe for your event, what we would suggest doing is what's called an alternate drop. Caterers will always give you 2 options. So it will be guests can choose what they want on day between 2 offerings, or the alternate drop. Now, the first being it's going to cost you a hell of a lot more, because they have got to cater double for everything, because if every single person in that room wanted the chicken and not the fish, they've got to have enough for everyone. So the best way to do that, if you really want that visual and that's the vibe of your day, is to have an alternate drop. So every second person gets the fish or the chicken. Other areas outside of food would be your lighting. So if you are tight on budget, but you want to create a really beautiful day, we would always say to look at your lighting and use that as your main sort of element of, decor. sometimes few visuals done well have, a huger impact than, a cluttered space. So you could forego, having a myriad of details on your tabletop and just have some really beautiful lighting, be that candles or overhead chandeliers or whatever serves purpose best for the style of your day.
I wondered about alcohol because when I got married, a lot of our friends and family love a drink and we kind of laid it all on, but that gets expensive really quick. Is there a way to economize without removing that option for people to get a bit merry?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think the biggest thing with weddings and the spend around alcohol is to keep it really simple. Wine and beer, obviously a staple. Champagne, everyone wants champagne, but there's tricks of the trade around when to serve that and how to serve it. We have been known on really beautiful events to serve Moet or Tattinger and use the bottle and showcase the bottle post-ceremony, pouring those drinks, and people have eyeballed the bottle. And then when we get to the sit-down reception and we've got speeches and toasts, we're out the back topping those glasses up with Dirts or Linda, and we're bringing those back out. A lot of the time, guests have got no clue that they're not still being served that fancy champagne from earlier.
It's all smoke and mirrors. That's a trick of the trade.
I think another good one is the cocktails. So everyone loves a cocktail, and it's kind of one of those specialty items to have at a wedding. Look, I would suggest instead of going down the path of espresso martinis and some fancy cocktail where really you need a mixologist or a specialist bar service person, serve something really easy, maybe like a gin spritzer where you just need the gin, the tonic, some ice and some cucumber. It's still delicious. It looks amazing. You've got the cocktail in there, but you haven't blown the budget with what you're serving.
Are there any areas where it would be a false economy to skimp on it? I'm kind of thinking like maybe you get I don't know why we keep talking about the great aunt, but the great aunt to take the photos and then find that they're all out of focus because she had a few too many glasses of the champagne.
Yeah, I mean, that would be terrible, right? I mean, I think photography is absolutely somewhere you don't skimp. That's your keepsake. That's your forever item from your wedding. So I think that, photography, it's such an investment. We often get asked by our clients, do we need a videographer? Do you think that's something we absolutely need for our day? And look, it's such personal preference. I didn't have a videographer and I deeply regret it for our wedding day because there are people that were at our wedding that are no longer with us that I absolutely wish that we captured. But it is an added expense and you can get similar value out of photography. But always for me, if you need to make a saving in order somewhere else in the event to make sure that you've got a brilliant photographer on day, I would absolutely be looking for those areas that you can save to reinvest back into your photography.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Those are the things you treasure forever and you show your kids. Is there, though, some areas that you'd class as a waste of money? People think they want them, but actually didn't really make a difference. The thing I'm going to suggest is the favours. I mean, do you really need to do party favours?
Top of mind, the favours. Do you know 99% of the time when we have clients, which is rare now because we really are not, huge we don't really advocate having favours because 99% of the time we are picking them up at the end of the night, we are reboxing them and handing them back to our client the next day to take home. So actually they are a colossal waste of money unless there's something super, super special, really elevated that no one wants to leave behind. It's not serving any great purpose to your event. That money's far better allocated somewhere else.
Yeah, just kind of ends up in the tip if people aren't going to actually appreciate them. Are there costs that, if you were going to start with your budget first and foremost, and let's hope that people do, that people fail to factor in? They go, there's the dress and the cake and the food and the venue and whatever, and then they forget about corkage or they forget about, I don't know, what are the hidden costs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, an obvious hidden cost for us and one that trips clients up all the time is guest transport. So if you are having a wedding, let's say off the grid, outside of a main city, you really need to factor that in. So let's use Waiheke, for example. Lots of our clients love Waiheke. It's beautiful. They feel it's close to Auckland, so it'll be easy for guests. But they forget that there is a ferry to get over there. It's $40 plus per person. And then getting them to the venue. They need to hire minibuses. They need to hire coaches. That's a cost that really you don't want to present to your guests to have to cover themselves to be a part of your day. That is an added cost that you need to factor into your overall budget. Another cost certainly would be for, again, those off-the-grid weddings. You need to look at that like you're building almost a small house from the ground up. There's nothing there. So you need to be really aware that you need to bring in bathroom units, you need to bring in generators, you need electricity for the caterers, for the lighting. And I think a lot of people, when they're looking at these beautiful blank spaces where they just think, well, pop a marquee there and it'll be amazing. There are all these hidden costs to that you don't think about.
This is the exact mistake I made. We had this amazing destination wedding and we brought in a shower block and the portaloos and, like glamping tents, and it was a whole thing, all of those costs add up.
They do. And then I think also, clients can forget, some venues expect you to pack out that night because they've got a quick turnaround. And they haven't factored in that if you are asking your suppliers and your vendors to do a late night pack out at 1, 2 in the morning, they're going to have a fee attached to that. If it's not the next morning, where they can schedule it in to the rest of their event calendar, they're going to charge you an extra fee. And those little fees, they all end up adding up. And, you can be thousands out of pocket from where you had started just by not reading contracts properly or not having the foresight to think, hey, there's no bathroom on site where I am. I need to bring one in.
What about the dress? Because obviously one of the number one things people look at and comment on about a wedding was what was the bride wearing, presuming there is a bride. But in this case, let's say there are wedding dresses involved. They're not cheap. Are there ways to economise, like these days, hiring a wedding dress?
Yeah, look, there's absolutely companies out there that hire dresses, wedding dresses. And if you jump onto Facebook, you can see the marketplaces where, brides who are not so attached to their dresses are really happily selling those. It could be a dress that you could be a size 10 and the dress is in a 14 and you can just get it nipped and tucked and you love that dress. Most of the time we do find, though, that it's probably the most personal element of the day. And I think particularly for girls who have always dreamt about their wedding day, the dress is probably the number one big ticket item in their mind that they want to get right. But you're right. Wedding dresses are a huge expense. They don't come cheap.
What sort of price range are we talking?
It varies. And again, it all varies.
How long is a piece of string?
In all honesty, we've had brides who have spent, $1,500, $3,000 on their dress, right through to other brides who have spent $50,000 on their dress. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's a huge spectrum on cost when it comes to dresses. And obviously that comes down to who the designer is, what you're adding to that dress, what detailing, lace, etc. is involved.
Yeah. I actually did sell my wedding dress after my wedding day, and I stumbled across the woman who bought it because I did it through a third party, and she looked incredible. I sent her a message to tell her that, and she was like, it was like that it was made for me when it was actually made for me. So I kind of love that it had a second outing. It had a, yeah. And so,
that's so special.
Yes, it was at 2 big special days instead of just one and then sat in a box for the rest of its life.
Yeah.
We are just going to take a quick break, but after that, I want to talk about some of the etiquette that sometimes can derail your budget considerations and how to navigate those. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to the Prosperity Project. We're talking about weddings, the cost of saying I do, and how to manage what can be a really big budget. And I wanted to talk to you, Astrid, about the etiquette, because I see debates online about, I've been invited to be a bridesmaid or a groomsman in this wedding party and now they want me to spend this much on a dress I'll never wear again. Where does that cost lie?
Yeah, that's a great question and a really tricky one as well. Look, I think a lot of brides these days are asking their bridesmaids to chip in, particularly if they're dresses that they can see their bridesmaids might wear again. I think the key to that is being really transparent from the get-go. As a bride, when you invite your bridesmaid to be a part of the bridal party, saying to them, you're so special and important to me, but covering the cost of your dress is something that I probably can't achieve. Would you be willing to contribute towards that or not? And if not, how do we work through this? Because I want you to be a part of my day, because it's not realistic for everyone to be able to cover, 3, 4, 5 bridesmaids' dresses, which would probably lead me to the point that if you can't, and you can't, maybe minimize your bridal party. Maybe keep it to 1 or 2 really special people instead of extending that to 5 or 6 to make your bridal party look large and amazing, which is so wonderful. And we've all got so many special friends, but include them in a different way. We did a wedding once where we had a bride who had 10, 12 really special friends, and she just could not decide who to pick. And it was getting really uncomfortable. And she came to us and she said, look, what do I do? And I said, listen, why don't you have what we will call a silent bridesmaid? And she said, well, what's that? And I said, instead of having everyone standing up next to you, pick your favorite, most special person, which ended up being her sister. And then for everyone else that's really important to you, have a little corsage made, which they got to attach. They were all matching and they attached them to their dresses. And during the ceremony, the celebrant acknowledged each of the girls sitting in the crowd wearing these flowers as the bride's very, very special friends. So it was a really nice way of doing it and keeping the cost down, because for her it wasn't achievable. For many reasons, but one of them being the cost of the dresses. And it's not just the dresses, is it? When you've got bridesmaids, it's the hair, it's the makeup, it's the shoes, it's the jewelry, it's the bridesmaids' gifts to ask them. I mean, the list is endless. So, that was a really nice way for one of our brides to acknowledge all those special people without really blowing her budget.
Is there sometimes tension, though, when the bride and the groom might have a different number of very special friends and they want symmetry on their wedding day? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I had that with my own wedding day. We had a really large bridal party. It was really tricky. Look, I think, again, just being transparent from the get-go and together as a couple, just being really sort of honest and open about who you'd like and why. Is there scope to kind of narrow that down a little bit? Are we going to offend anyone? And just having those difficult conversations from the get-go. I think people are really understanding. Weddings are such a big expense. It's the biggest party as a couple you are ever going to throw in your lifetime, most likely. I think people understand that. And so I think particularly with people that are super close to you, you can have those really honest conversations with them and let them know how important they are. And hopefully they won't be offended. But yeah, just marrying that up with your partner to be and making sure you're both on the same page from the get-go is super important.
Have you experienced personally or from the sidelines any sort of disasters when it comes to people's expectations and it not matching up with what the couple wants to do?
Do you know, we have been so fortunate with all our couples that I actually can't say we've had anything like that where there's been a significant disaster that pops straight to mind. I am sure that this happens a lot. I think the beauty of having a wedding coordinator or a planner on your team is that if there is a glitch like that, we can work through it before it becomes a major
So you're like the mediator. You can help smooth troubled waters.
Yeah. Absolutely the mediator. To be honest, who we mediate probably the most between would be couples and their parents. Just making sure that regardless of who's paying for the day, that the parents still feel included, particularly the mums. A lot of parents particularly the mums have something to say about the flowers, we find. A lot of them are green fingers and love to be involved in that. And, there's certain ways that we can pull them in and make them feel really important and included.
Well, that actually raises a really interesting point. Can DIY help keep the costs down? Like I got mums and aunties to bake things for the sweets table that was served after dessert, or maybe it was instead of dessert, I can't remember, maybe with the cake, or, maybe you've got someone who is great at flower arranging or bakes the wedding cake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that DIYing bits and pieces here and there definitely can have an impact on your budget. I think utilising people whether that's industry suppliers, whether that's friends, like you said, who can make amazing cakes. I think if you can tap into that, then absolutely. Obviously making sure that whoever you're tapping into can actually do what they're saying they can do, so it's not an absolute disaster on day. But yeah, there's certainly savings to be made if you've got people who are willing to be a part of your day and gift that to you in some capacity.
Having said that, I did go to one wedding where they self-catered, and by the time I lined up to get something to eat, there wasn't really anything left. So I imagine there are some things where there's a line that maybe you're best to leave it to the professionals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Food being one of them.
What about the destination weddings? We talked about that potentially blowing out your costs. But I guess some people, if they go do it at a hotel in Fiji or whatever, maybe it's a more all-inclusive package. But when it comes to the etiquette, can that exclude really important people who are just like, do you know what? That's a cost I can't wear, and so I can't be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's why a lot of people do actually choose these destination weddings. A lot of people who have got these really large guest lists and know they need to cut numbers, heading offshore to hold your wedding is absolutely a definitive way of making sure that your guest list is effectively cut in half. So while it's lovely, and you're right, you can save on amazing packages, you can turn up to these hotels and it's all pre-made, pre-done for you, a little bit of a cookie cutter style wedding, but feels extra special because you're in a tropical island or you're, somewhere romantic outside of New Zealand. It certainly does not work for all your guests. And that's disappointing for some of your guests. But at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, it's about being transparent. And I think people understand this is the biggest day of your life and it's your day, your way. And there's other ways that you can celebrate with them later. Lots of people come back after their destination wedding and have a little party, and that doesn't have the wedding price tag attached to it. They can have all the people they love in one room and just have, some great cheese platters, couple of drinks, and, a pre-wedding celebration.
We keep talking about the biggest day of your life, but actually for many people, there's the pre-event the night before, maybe the rehearsal dinner, there's the day after function. Does that also blow out the cost? And is there a way to be a little bit more budget conscious with having the multi-day fiesta?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think a lot of people now do want to have that multi-day experience, but you're absolutely right in saying that each additional day, pre or prior, that you are adding in has a price tag included. So the most cost-effective way to doing, a post-event or a pre-event is to keep it really small, really intimate, and do it at home. Do it somewhere where you don't have the venue hire. You can self-cater, you can bring in all your own alcohol. You don't need, an abundance of flowers and styling items to make it look really special. So just keep it a little bit more low-key, minimalistic, and then put your spend into the wedding day itself.
What I would say, though, is it also means if you do it that way, and I'm speaking from personal experience, that you're going to be up early the next day putting on the slow-cooked pulled pork that's going to feed everybody at lunchtime after your wedding.
Absolutely. And I think this is where the great aunt really comes into play.
Yeah, very good point.
This is where they can step up and really help the bride and groom. I think that's where family generally does kind of jump on board and, they offer their help at that point. And yeah.
What are your thoughts on the likes of wishing wells or just asking for cash that some people do and guests love it because they know exactly what the bride and groom or the groom and bride, they've been together for ages, they've got all the serving dishes they could possibly need. So how about you just contribute to our honeymoon? Or is that a bit on the nose?
No, look, I don't think it's on the nose at all now. I think it's actually more common now that brides and grooms are asking for, a cash donation of some description. They're asking you to contribute funds towards their honeymoon via a travel agent. We're having lots of couples who have found a beautiful piece of artwork at an art gallery, and they're having their guests contribute towards that. I think as well, when couples have been together for such a long time, they've got their iron, they've got their dishes, they've got their teapots, they don't need more. So it's not realistic to have, that traditional
setting up house. Yeah.
So I think that, I don't think asking for cash is on the nose now. I think it's really helpful for couples.
Well, look, you've had some great suggestions about how to make what can be a really expensive day a bit more manageable, because the last thing I would advise people to do is to go into debt to fund just that one day, because finances are a big source of relationship stress. You do not want to start there. So thank you very much, Astrid Braid. Thanks for listening to The Prosperity Project. You can follow this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and please do chuck us a rating or a review while you're there. For more personal finance and business content, head to nzherald.co.nz, and please do feel free to get in touch with your questions and your stories. nadine.higgins at nzme.co.nz. A reminder, though, that this podcast is informational only, and nothing we say here should be considered personalised financial advice. But also remember that while listening to this podcast is hopefully going to be additive to your financial knowledge, and that is fantastic, knowing stuff doesn't create change. Doing stuff does. So what action are you going to take today to make your life more prosperous? My producer for this episode is Ethan Sills. Sound engineer is Richard Martin. I'm Nadine Higgins. Thanks for listening to The Prosperity Project.